Again, Danny, 8:59 a.m. I think our clocks are different. I think you have
No,
9.
mine says 8:59. I
Oh,
just get excited and it turns to 8:59. I'm like, a minute's gonna pass
geez.
so fast that I should just hit it now.
All right. Well, we're gonna have to cut a minute off the end of this
I
episode. Sorry, you
Yeah,
guys.
we'll start changing our time starting to
Yeah,
8:59
I
instead of
actually wasn't
9.
paying attention. I thought it was 9. Whatever. It's
Good
close
morning,
enough.
guys. How's it going? Happy Saturday. Do you have a coffee? I'm already almost done my coffee.
Definitely do.
I already
Some
finished
good
mine
stuff.
on the tea.
I need some coffee today for sure.
Hmm.
Well,
Hmm.
today's Saturday, so we're gonna talk about coding stuff because that's what we do every
Ooh,
Saturday.
Is that? Yeah,
how
that's pretty
about
much what we
that?
do.
Pretty much what we've been doing for years now. So glad to have
Hmm.
everybody here. Um, yeah, how's your week been? Been busy coding? What have you
Yeah,
guys been up to?
You know
good
what,
week,
you know
busy
what
week.
I've been doing that's pretty interesting is
Don't.
for a while I was like coding and hacking every day and not like 7 days a week.
Yeah.
And it was getting to a point where it was getting to be too much. And so I started making it where on the weekend I wouldn't. I
Oh,
would stop myself. I
You mean
know,
you're taking
right?
days off
mind
on the
blowing.
weekend?
I know.
Mind
What?
blowing.
But for like years, I was just going 7 days a week. So a
Yeah.
couple of weeks ago, I said, okay, on the weekends, unless I have to do something, I'm just not going to. And it's
Mm,
kind of crazy because now I'm like doing hobbies, but I'm like
I'm doing other
by the
things.
time by the time Monday comes around, I'm like dying to get back to it, which is pretty
yeah.
cool.
I do remember that experience of like when I first started coding, of sort of not like being scared to go and code. Do you remember that? Of like,
Yes. Yeah. Because
because
you're
I
afraid to
don't want
break
to
stuff.
break something or yeah.
Yeah.
Now I'm the exact opposite. I'm like, let's break something and see. And now, I mean, I I know it's like a habit thing, but also there's just like this confidence level of, I know I can figure something out, so I'm more inclined to do a tutorial or something like that, and then I can actually stick with it. Sit there for like, yesterday I sat there for like 4 hours and just did a coding tutorial, which was pretty sweet.
Mm.
Yeah, it's cool too. I mean, I'm always just amazed at like, usually when you do stuff for years, like you start to get tired of it or something, but like I still love it. And I think part of it is because there's so much too that you can always explore. Like you're like never out of things to like learn, to dig
Yeah,
into, to check out, or to even just get more knowledgeable about like that you might like, I mean, there's so much
yeah.
out there that it's like
I did
I
that
like that.
yesterday. I went in down a rabbit hole of like doing a tutorial, and then there was a button I could click on, and I clicked on that, and it took me to another page, and then that page had like 15 other terms I didn't know of, so I started digging into those. So, but
Yeah.
yeah, I know what you mean. It's endless.
But I like how you bring that up, how you're still like interested in learning and doing tutorials. Because this week I overheard someone talking about how they've been trying to code, but they've been doing it for like a few months. And
Yeah,
they're like it's just too hard. Like you need to be good at it or something like that. It's
Uh,
just you can't get it. It's like, and I'm just thinking, I was like a few months, like you need years of this in order to like get somewhere.
But I think that's the
yeah,
because you see all these books and stuff and all these things, and I think that's the problem. People think they have in their head like, oh, if I don't pick it up right away, like in a week, I must not be good at it. And it's like,
yeah.
well, it's a skill, dude. You have to build it up. It's like anything else. Like,
And it's yeah, it takes time. I'm like simultaneously doing three different tutorials and reading two different books at the same time. And it's, what I think I like a lot about coding is that it all fits together.
yeah,
Like all these different things that I'm learning are separate, but at the same time, one's about TypeScript, one's about JavaScript, one's about Next.js, so they're all related.
Yeah.
yeah.
I I told you guys I was watching that movie Black Hat, and like they, how like what they do with the tech movies where like they show whatever going across the wires inside of a computer,
Yeah.
and like they way overdid that because like the first 5 minutes of the movie is just like that following it around, and then there's like more
Yeah.
cutscenes in the movie where they're doing that, and like every time there's a hack that happens, it's just like that cutscene where it goes
Stuff going
inside of a
through stuff.
Yeah.
computer, and you see like,
This
yeah,
is, by the way, this is a low budget hacking film for anybody else who wasn't
yeah.
there for the first part of that
It
conversation.
has it has Thor in it. Yeah,
Oh, and it has Thor in it. Yeah.
the dude
Who
who
doesn't
plays
like
Thor.
Thor?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's awesome. Well, good morning, everybody. Good morning, Bryce and Tristan and Chris. How are you guys doing? Tell us in the comments what you've been working on this week. Today's episode, to get to the topic, is all about tech stacks because this
Woo.
week I was talking to somebody inside the group and they were like, what does stack mean? Because I use the term and I think it's a term that's thrown around quite a bit in a lot of different ways. And so I wanted to answer the question for everybody and have a little conversation on what are stacks, what are tech stacks, and what do we mean by that? So you guys want to answer that question? What is
Sure.
a stack?
What a tech stack
Well,
is?
there's like a
Well,
short stack. I think
Yeah.
that's how many
yeah,
pancakes is in that?
I think that's like three. I think
Yeah, it
no,
is.
I think the short
Regularly.
stack's two, and
Every
then
once in a
four.
while, IHOP has all you can eat pancakes, and so
Yeah,
that's a full stack.
That's a
that's a
big
that's
stack.
a extra full
Well,
stack.
actually, that's a good thing. We say when somebody can do front and back end, right? We say it's full stack development, right? Because you're
Yeah,
developing on the whole across the whole stack, the technology stack, and that's all it
yeah,
is. It's just whatever technologies you're using, basically, right? For that, whatever your project is to run and to work and to be developed. So it's going to
yeah,
include, front end technologies, back end technologies, and other dependencies maybe that you might need, things like that.
yeah. So I think if everybody in this group, I think, sort of has a different direction that they're headed in, which is what we like and what we encourage, right? Like not everybody's learning the same stack, right? So, can you give an example of maybe like some different stacks or at least like maybe the core stack of web development, and then we can build from there? What is the core stack?
I think
Anybody?
I think probably like so you could start with front end for web development,
Mm-hmm.
and the foundational technologies for that would be HTML, CSS, and JavaScript.
Yeah.
And you could also consider the JavaScript frameworks or modern JavaScript as
Yeah.
a part of that front end stack. So that would be stuff like React or Next or Vue, Angular, different things like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Those
And
are
there's
pretty common ones that like I definitely heard when I was getting into web development. I think a lot of people do. What else? What were you gonna say,
It,
Danny?
I was gonna say there's like some ones that I think a lot of people know, like probably the name like Mern is a popular one, right? So
Mhm.
Yeah.
that's just using like MongoDB, Express, React, and
Yeah.
Node.js, right? And I mean like there's different ones, and I think they all have different use cases that you're gonna, and that's the important thing too, is learning how to pick technologies appropriately for your projects.
Yeah.
Like we use a lot of times, like I know we use a lot like Next.js, React, Tailwind, and then Firebase, which would be basically our tech stack, and then any other, maybe dependencies we might throw in there for various projects. Yeah.
Yeah.
So a lot of these anagrams like MERN, MEVN, mean, LAMP, WAMP, MAMP, all that
I
stuff
know.
is basically oftentimes they comprise of four different things.
Yeah.
So there's an operating system, there's a server, there's a database, and then a programming language. And so that's
Yeah.
generally what you'll get. Like for example, LAMP is a pretty popular one that's been around for a while. So that's Linux, Apache, MySQL, and then PHP, Python, Perl, whatever the programming language is. But then you have other ones like
It's
Danny
usually a
mentioned,
P.
MERN. Yeah,
It has to
yeah.
be a P. You can't choose anything else.
Can't do any
Well,
language.
well, so there's LAMP with Linux, but then there's
Yeah.
MAMP with Mac OS. There's WAMP with Windows, and the
I've
other
used
stuff
WAMP
stays
before,
the
yeah.
same. Yeah,
Yeah, when
the
I
other
was I
stuff
was
stays.
messing around with PHP for a while and I used WAMP and installed
Mhm.
a pretty interesting, I found an interesting thing that had the whole stack together. It was cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tristan in the comments writes, would you add a CSS framework like Tailwind into that? And I would say, yeah, because that makes up part of the tech stack that you're actually using. And I think that's a common thing is that we're talking about maybe four different technologies in any of these. Like I think one of the main tech stacks that you'll see in boot camps and are widely sort of pushed out there is the MERN stack, which is like Danny just said, Mongo, Express, React, and Node. That's like a pretty modern tech stack. But we can throw in other technologies into that depending upon the project, right? Like Tailwind is
Yeah.
definitely part of that. And we don't always say it, right? It's like easy to say that MERN, but then you start adding all the technologies that are in there, and that acronym
Mhm.
becomes very
Yeah.
long.
I was gonna say, well, if you look at the ones that have an acronym, like or Mean and Mern are two popular ones. Mean's just Mongo, Express, Angular, and Node. You'll notice that
And there's
like
also MEVN.
Yeah.
with Vue.
They also, but you'll notice they they tend to leave out a lot of like the other stuff that's assumed, right? So you have Angular is there because that's like that's your front end framework, right? Or React is your front end framework. They're not
Yeah.
mentioning all the other stuff that you're using on the front end as well, but that is all part of your stack, right? Because it's all the technologies you're using to build your project and make it work.
Hmm.
Yeah, exactly. Um, Randall, I know you had mentioned this at one point, but this is I've been using this ever since you mentioned it in one of our coaching sessions, was using Wappalizer. So there's a
Hmm.
Chrome extension. It's called Wappalizer, and it's WAPP-alizer. And basically, it just sits in.
Like Maggie Lizer, as in
Yeah.
Lizer ass off. Yeah. Anyways,
Um,
for those of Arrested Development fans.
so it's a Chrome extension, and you just like leave it sitting there, and any page that you open, it's going to do some analysis on that page. And in most cases, it will actually tell you the tech stack, right? The full tech stack,
Hmm.
like the JavaScript frameworks, the web frameworks, and any other things that are included in there, like Webpack. And, there's a lot of other things that could potentially show up in especially large applications, right? Like we think about things like Uber, and there's a lot going on there. And their tech stack probably has 15 to 20 or more technologies built into there because they're doing all sorts of um, things like load handling and um, managing multiple users locations. Like there's a lot more.
Tons of data.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like if you think about how much data is being moved around the Uber network at any one point in time, that's a lot of information. So they have to handle that more efficiently. They can't just like build that using a basic MERN stack. At the core, it might be that, but there might be 20 other technologies in there. So
Yeah, but
and
that extension makes it very easy to find out what technology, because there are other ways to do it that are more manual. Like you can use the curl command via the command line and add some flags so that you can get the headers back. So you can look at those, or you can use a proxy to catch all the header information. You can use Nmap to scan for different services and versions. But Wappalizer is just a very easy extension that'll do it for you.
yeah, totally. So one of the things I wanted to ask you guys is like well, two questions really, and I'll start with one and then we can go move on to the other. So another question that I get a lot is which stack should I choose as a new
Hmm.
developer? Like how do I choose which stack to learn? Because there are all these different options.
I
And
think, yeah.
yeah, go
I
ahead. What
think
do you think?
Go ahead.
okay, so like everybody will say like, well, there's no answer because it's different for everybody. But
Mhm.
I would say that's bollocks. Because like every it, I mean, maybe I'm just getting old, and like part of getting old is like,
Maybe I'm
you
just
know,
a grumpy
Everything
old
costs too
man.
much.
yeah.
It's,
I mean, using
But
words like bullocks is definitely
yeah, that's definitely
so.
gonna
yeah,
anachronistic
You
but
there.
got to
like
use like
okay,
Riz or mid or something like that if you
yeah,
want to be like a Gen Alpha.
yeah, definitely not. So uh I think I do think that starting with HTML, CSS, JavaScript is probably one of the best ways to go about things for most people, because it opens you up for the most possibilities of pretty much doing anything. Like even if you wanted to work in data with Python or something like that, well, guess what? You could learn Python really fast once you know how to use JavaScript. But
Yeah,
also you'll be able to create web apps so that you can host your whatever Python thing on there that you're doing. And then
yeah,
the other thing is, let's say that you think you want to do Python when you first start, and then you learn more about development, and it turns out that maybe you don't want to do Python. But if that's all you learn, you could be locked into that. And whereas if you get a job in web development, there's literally so many jobs available for that type of stuff.
yeah. I
I'd
would
also
also.
say, oh, I was gonna,
Yeah, Danny.
I was gonna say too. I think, in some sense too, I think when you're just starting out, it doesn't actually matter that much too, because whatever you learn, you can learn something else easily once you already know some of it. So I do think like the web technologies are a good starting point, because I think there's a lower bar of entry, especially for HTML, CSS. You can start doing stuff sooner, see what's happening, start integrating JavaScript and stuff, and start learning kind of how to build things that you can see, which is nice, instead of like all in the command line and stuff like that. So it does, I think it makes it easier to work with at the outset. But like you said too, once you know something, you can learn anything else. And I mean, that's a lot of times what developers are doing on jobs too, is like they have to learn new technologies sometimes because things switch or change. And for whatever reason, they adopt something new and they need to figure it out.
Yeah, definitely. Also, I think um now like a few I would say not a few years ago, but maybe like 10 years ago, 5 or 10 years ago, JavaScript was not as full featured. It was more of just a front end language. And with, Node.js and all these other technologies that have come out recently, it makes it a lot easier for a developer to develop both front end technologies and back end technologies in JavaScript alone. And so that's why I think JavaScript makes the most sense to me, because I don't have to learn a different language for front end development and back end. I mean, you're going to have to learn HTML, CSS, and JavaScript anyway. If you want to learn front end, no matter how you go about it, you have to learn that. And so if you can understand JavaScript and then take that technology to the back end, right? Why not? And why not use Node.js when your other options are things like PHP, Python, like Ruby on Rails, well, Ruby, right? It makes sense. You already know JavaScript, so you can just extend that knowledge even more.
The
Go
other
ahead,
thing
Dan.
too, they think a lot has changed in the past like 8 years. Now you have, especially like with cloud services and stuff, have gotten so good that like it has changed. You don't have companies like hosting their own servers as much anymore. You don't have, or individuals building projects don't need to host it on their own servers. So that changed a lot of stuff too, because it made it like more flexible and it makes JavaScript more powerful too, because you can literally use, or any language really, you can use almost anything you want, honestly, to connect with those. A lot of them are very flexible in that sense too. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I see a question here too is I think it's Durays said, why do companies still use old tech stacks? What do you guys think? Why
I
did
think a
they?
lot of that just depends too on the company and whether they want to update stuff too, or their specific use case might still call
Yeah.
for it.
Well, a lot of times people are stuck with legacy technology. Like
Yeah.
my first
Mm.
job as a programmer, I worked as a satellite programmer, and so once they shoot the satellite up, you're stuck with that technology.
Yeah,
And
that's a
so
pretty good
I
example.
Actually,
yeah,
yeah,
and so this
Voyager, you remember they had to call people in to help with that when they were trying to get it restarted
Yeah.
because, it's super old technology. Like,
yeah.
Yeah.
And so like this was I mean, this was in the early 2000s ish. And like the modern languages then were C, C++, Java, but we were still coding in Fortran, which is like from 77, old language. And nowadays, but like a satellite is an easy one to think of, but like you have to think of all these companies out there. They invest money in technology. So they've bought servers, they've bought computers, they've bought all this different infrastructure, and then sometimes they just can't update stuff. And this presents security vulnerabilities, but also you just have legacy software, legacy stuff, and you have people just developing there in a long way. I think they call it technical debt, where
Yeah.
basically you have this thing that's like hodgepodge together for so long that eventually you can't refactor the whole thing. You just have to keep piling on a bunch of garbage.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about enterprise level software, it's not a simple to-do app, right? There's a lot of code in that web application or whatever it is, that application. And so to actually do that transition would be, I think it would be too expensive in most cases. And the other thing too, and I think you sort of touched upon this, is you think about it, you've been hiring developers to develop in a certain language. And then most developers don't know like 15 different languages. They know maybe one, two, three different languages. And so you would have to go and basically do this big conversion of converting your entire code base to a different language. And at the same time, your entire employee base, right?
yeah.
Because you have to like fire the people who were previously doing the work and hire new ones, or there's a huge learning curve where they have to transition into learning some other language and using that. So yeah, I mean, technical debt is a good example, and vendor lock too, right? Like one of the things that
Yeah.
comes into play when you're deciding on a a tech stack is that you're going to be locked into some vendor. So you should understand like what are the costs of doing these things, right? Like having a database and running an API is not free. So those are decisions that get made in the beginning. And you sort of just have to live with those or choose to change down the road for an expensive, change.
Yeah, and most companies too, you have to remember they didn't just start 5 years ago. They started way back and have been building
Yeah.
this technology for a long time. And yeah, I mean, it's expensive to change stuff. So if they don't really have a huge need to, they're not going to.
Yeah.
It's yeah,
There's also the fear that the new technology may not last. So
yeah,
like
Yeah.
a company that's been using Java for 20 years or whatever, there may be it may have better options nowadays that seem a lot more attractive, but maybe the new technology's only been around for a couple of years. And you got to
Yeah.
think, is this something that's going to stand the test of time, or are we going to make a transition now and then have to do it again in another few years?
Yeah,
yeah,
definitely. I think this brings up a good point, and that was my second thing after like how does somebody choose which tech stack to learn?
That
The
was
next one,
intentionally, we intentionally made that segue
yeah,
so
that
easy
was a
for
yeah,
you.
there's a fake
You're
commenter.
welcome.
So
uh,
the second thing was when you're actually going to build a project, how do you choose the tech stack you're going to use, right? So not which one to learn, but if I'm going to lead building some project, how do I choose? Because there's a bunch of different options out there, right? So I have a list here I can go over because I had a little list made up for me. Thank you, ChatGPT. But these are a great example of different things. But I thought maybe if you guys had any, you could throw them out there and we'll see if they're on the list.
okay. I mean, I would say like, at least this is one of the reasons why you would do like a discovery call and stuff to talk to people first because you want to actually get a sense of what you're doing, right? What you're going to work
Yeah.
on, what are the requirements, what do they have in mind, and you know, do they have any stuff that they already have? Like, because sometimes, if you're building something for a company, they might have a database already, or they might have something they're using already that they want to import over. That might dictate to some extent, what you're going to use. Their project's going to dictate a lot of it, like what you're actually building, and also, their actual how much resources they have that they can commit to it will also sometimes determine the tech stack. So a lot of it is, I think, dependent on the
Yeah.
project itself.
Yeah, that's number
Yeah.
one is understanding project requirements. And I think that's a great point, right? Is you have to ask those important questions. Like Danny and I are in the process of working on building a mobile app for a company. And we've already had a couple of discovery calls with them and we haven't even touched code yet, right? And those those calls are helping us decide what tech stack we're going to use so that we can give them, the best product. Because they want to build a mobile app and then we offer them the option to also build a web app into that. And we're able to do that because of the tech stack that we're using, which is Next and something called Capacitor, which actually allows you to build mobile apps from your React code, which is pretty cool, right? So
Yeah.
we're able to actually give more benefit to the customer by choosing the tech stack that works the best for them. What do
Yeah.
you think? What anything else?
I was going to say use what you know. So
Also a big
that's
one.
Yeah.
that's a good thing
Yeah.
too. So even though there's some new flashy tech stack, it's probably not helpful to use it if you have to learn the whole entire thing.
Hmm.
Yeah, knowing what you're
Yeah,
comfortable with
absolutely.
is hugely important. Yeah, and being able to and that's important too for when you even take on jobs in the first place too, is talking to them and figuring out because you know what you're comfortable with, you have a good, sense of what you could learn if you need to learn some new stuff. So making sure you can actually complete the project is a big part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Because that learning curve can add a lot of time to, you know, building a project too. If you have to learn a whole new technology, that also means that you probably don't know all the ins and outs of it, so you don't know how well it will work. So I think that's definitely a huge consideration. And sometimes, you know, based on those requirements, you have to build outside of your expertise, which means maybe you should charge more or find another developer to join your team who has more expertise in that area. So, yeah. What else do you guys think? Anything else that you have in mind? I'll mention also like that one of the other things here is like evaluate development speed and time to market, which it also says consider developer expertise. So like those are two things that I think are tied hand in hand, right? You want to be able to, if I want to build an app, I want to be able to build it pretty quickly, right? So if learning a new framework or a new library means that it's going to be slower, that's going to decrease or increase the time to market, which, in the world of tech means your competition could have a huge advantage over you.
Funny,
And that's
funny
job.
story
Oh, go
about
ahead.
that.
Yeah.
Oh, so funny story about that. So the Department of Defense has this orange book, which has a whole bunch of stuff that you need to comply in order to make sure that software that you're developing for them is secure enough.
Yeah.
And what oftentimes happens because the standards are so stringent is that by the time the software actually gets developed, it's already outdated and useless and they don't need it.
Yeah. Sounds like a government thing.
That sounds
Yeah.
exactly like, yeah, what they would do, especially the
Yeah.
Department of Defense. Jeez.
All right. So I have a few other considerations, unless you have more that you want
Well, I
to.
was going to say too, I think one of the interesting things now too is I think cloud services have really changed stuff a lot though too, because now like
Yeah.
back in the day when you did have like you had to use servers and stuff, scaling up was also a huge consideration and difficult. But now like a lot of these services do it automatically for you. And I
Yeah.
think that's changed so much. And so understanding them can be a huge win in terms of getting jobs because you can actually develop for anything, small or large, and know that, it's going to scale appropriately with it rather than having to think of that ahead of time, which people used to have to, take that into consideration. Like, how big is our server? Can we actually, upgrade this fast or quickly if we need to? That's a lot of money and resources required for that.
Yeah, absolutely. You guys are nailing these on the head. The next one I had on the list was consider scalability and performance, right? And
Yeah.
that's huge. And that is one of the benefits now is all these cloud services. Like you don't have to think about scaling servers up, which is huge. I mean, I remember a couple of months ago, somebody asked me about that. They're like, I'm starting to get into web development. Which of these home servers should I buy to try? And
None.
I was like, don't do that. Like, there's services out there that make our lives easy. You don't want to have to host a server in your house. That sounds horrible.
Also, if you're just messing around, you can just host it right from your computer if you really want to. I
Yeah,
mean,
exactly.
you don't need to
Really.
get another thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, Here's some other ones that were on the list. So long-term maintenance and support. So we kind of touched upon this too, is like, you know, is this language going to stick around for a while?
Yeah.
And
How many
are
developers
people,
know it, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
like are people building on it? I mean, that's one of the reasons why I think using React is so powerful because so many developers already use React. And then now there's Next.js, which makes a lot of sense learning that because it's built on top of React, right?
Well, I remember too. This was right around, I think, right after the pandemic, when the the IRS in New Jersey and specifically didn't have a lot of people, and they
Yeah.
were trying to upgrade their software because they're having problems, and they were literally had to make a call out for anybody that knew COBOL because like that's
Yeah.
like been around for I don't know how long, and like but that's one of the problems, right? Is you have these outdated technologies, you need to find people that can actually develop with them too at a certain point. So at some point too, updating might be necessary as well.
Yeah, definitely. Chris said in the comments that he has a Minecraft server in the house. So if anybody needs a Minecraft developer, hit up Chris. He's got you on lock.
Mhm.
That's
Here's
awesome.
some other ones. So budget constraints. So there's a cost associated with all these different services. So understanding if there's licensing fees, if there's just service fees involved with them, what they are, and what that's going to cost you based on the user count. I mean, I'd say across the board they're generally the same or similar, but um, there are some that are probably better with different numbers of users.
Well,
So
like for a good example of that would be using an open source Linux platform as opposed to Red Hat Linux. Because
yeah,
and Red Hat, you have to pay huge fees in order to use that, whereas open source stuff is free. And essentially, it's the same exact thing, except
yeah,
one is more targeted towards businesses and that type of thing, and one is targeted towards everyone.
and you get a cool hat with one of them too.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I wonder what color it comes in.
I think it's red. That's what I heard.
Ah, that makes sense.
The other thing too I would add too is, and this is for I think good to consider when you're doing a project, is trying to also limit the amount of technologies used to what's necessary so that updating and stuff and just making, feature changes in the future is not too difficult. And we talk about this a lot with our group, like, like installing, like there's all these packages out there and stuff that become dependencies.
Yeah.
You know, which ones you use can be a huge burden in the future if you use too many, or, you know, if you use insecure ones, stuff like that can be an issue.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, yeah, here's a couple more as we get towards the end of today's live stream. So there's security considerations. I think that's an important one too, of like, you know, especially with like compliance. So if you're in
Even though
industries
everybody keeps
where,
losing everything constantly, all the time.
yeah, I know, like we talk about security and nobody in the world cares about security anymore, but
So one of
but
the
it's
best things
important.
that you can do for security is use the latest versions of things. So
Yeah.
oftentimes the vulnerabilities appear when you're using older versions of it because
Yeah.
what happens is things are out for a while. There's no way that you can create code that doesn't have bugs in it. And so when things are out for a while, people find bugs and then there are updates. There are patches made to that correct those bugs. But if you don't update what you're using, then whatever software you're using is vulnerable to these. And that's actually one of the biggest targets for people going after businesses is they just look for businesses that are using outdated software and then they're able to exploit them.
Yeah, definitely. And Bryce commented,
Good
don't
point.
hard code your API keys. Yes.
Or
That you
store
should not
passwords in
do
plain
despite
text.
yeah, don't do that despite the tech stack. But yeah, like one of the other things it says here too is like, you know, considering frameworks that have built-in security features, like I was just walking through the Next.js tutorial yesterday, and they were talking about how they have like SQL injection prevention built in, right, to Next.js. So that's like huge because that saves time and things that you have to think about as a developer. So if you can use more secure technologies, you'll be better off because who wants to be hacked at the end of
Well,
the
we
day?
talk about that a lot too, like using those backend services like Firebase for like auth, because
Yeah,
they've already developed a very secure authentication system. And
yeah,
instead of you trying to write it yourself, which can be very challenging and can lead to security risks, you know, and vulnerabilities.
yeah, exactly. Couple other ones here. So flexibility and future proofing. We sort of talked about that. So, you know, is this something that people are going to use in the future? Also, community and documentation. So I have used some things in the past that
Oh
have
God.
absolute shit documentation, and that is a huge consideration, right? Because if you're building in a technology, you're going to be using the documentation frequently, and if it sucks, it's your life's going to be, you know, hell trying to deal with
And
that.
if you try to update it and they update like their version, then you have to go back
Yeah.
and like figure out like which changed, and if the documentation sucks, man, it's impossible.
Yeah. Another one is prototyping, and this is one of the reasons why I love Firebase so much
Yeah.
because Firebase is what's known as a backend as a service. So it basically has everything that you would need in your tech stack that's like the backend side, all built into one service. And while this does mean that you may pay a little bit more than breaking up all those services and having something deal with them, they all work together perfectly. And you know, they were designed and built together. So it makes prototyping very quickly. You can build the front end and then you have the whole back end set up. You can very easily communicate between them. Using, you know, a bunch of different languages means that you're going to have to do a lot of connecting different things
Yeah.
together. And that means that it's going to take you longer to prototype and make changes to that prototype for when you're ready to go into, you know, production of that app. Um, some other ones are industry standards and use cases. So, you know, what are people in this industry using? Um,
Well,
and
also
then,
it comes up too, like, are you going to be looking at this more? Are we expecting more people to use it on their phone? Like, is it an app that you really want to
yeah,
build, or is it like a web app or something? Or are you talking about like software, which is actually not as much anymore because web apps are so
yeah, exactly.
powerful? But yeah,
So I think that's pretty good. I think by
yeah.
this point, you should have a full understanding of what a tech stack is, you know, front end, back end, and in between. If you guys are into this stuff and you are interested in learning more about tech stacks, we do have a pretty awesome group of mentoring students and coaches and a private community that we have available to select few people who are really interested in being, you know, committed to this idea of becoming a web developer. So I know a bunch of the people who join us on these calls are already inside the Web Dev Incubator, which is our private community. But if you're not and you're looking for a community of, like-minded developers who want to learn and grow together, that's what we offer. We're happy to have an action call with you and explain to you what that group is about, and really just give you some free mentoring. If you're just getting into tech and want to learn more about what tech stack you should learn, we can help you decide like which one is the best for you to learn, right? Because everybody's different. So feel free to drop a comment below, maybe tech stack
Stack or stack?
today.
Tech stack or
Yeah,
stack? Yeah.
stack or
Mhm.
tech stack. If you write that below, we'll reach out to you and we'll set up a call with you, or just give us a quick DM and we'll be happy to set up a time to just like chat, see where you are as a developer, give you some free mentoring, see if you'd be interested in the web dev incubator. And if not, no worries. The people in there are very committed and we love our community in there. So if you're committed and this is what you want, we'd be happy to have you join. But if not, just keep sticking around and coming back on every Saturday when we have these calls, and engage in the comments like everyone has today, which is thank you guys so much for that. Love having you here. Anything you guys want to say before we sort of break out and get ready
I
for our
just yeah,
call
just
today?
want to mention that we with Web Dev Incubator, we do have private Zoom meetings where we go
Yes.
on multiple times per week.
Randy's
We meet with
privates.
yeah, exactly. And so we do that, but also, I was thinking about it this week because like a lot of people get to a point where they're like, okay, I'm ready to get a job, but I just can't get a job. And that's really where Web Dev Incubator shines is
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
basically from day one get you started doing what you would do if you were working for a company. And before long, you're able to do this stuff on your own. So then you can choose if you want to do it freelance or if you want to go work for a company. You have the projects, you have the portfolio, you're ready to go. So if that sounds like you, if you're ready to get hired as a web developer, or you just want to get hired sooner, then write tech stack or lamp or mamp or pamp or any of these things down
Yeah.
in the comments.
Camp it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Definitely. I mean, that's one of the things that we see a lot is that a lot of people in this industry do a boot camp and just assume that doing a boot camp is going to get you hired, but there's a lot more to it. There's a whole human element, and that's what we focus on. We all did a boot camp together, and we watched as pretty much 99% of the other people inside the boot camp sat there and did nothing. And because
Yeah.
we had this engaged community of the three of us, we were able to not only learn more, but also find work easier. And so that's what we built inside the Web Dev Incubator. I want to give like a big actual shout out to Chris because Chris has been with us since the beginning. He's the first person who joined the Web Dev Incubator, and this week was the first time that he has worked since then. He found a job working for Bank of America, and pretty awesome to see him, in his button-up shirt and slacks and taking pictures from a big
Yeah.
office building. This is what it is. It's a process, and Chris is right now working a tech adjacent job, literally like he's working next to developers. So it's going to be very easy for him to transition into
Oh yeah.
development role, after a few months working here. So
Or just
excellent,
when one of
excellent.
them goes away to grab a coffee, he can just
Yeah,
sit at their
just
Yeah.
sit down at
computer.
his seat. Yeah. And but no, like huge shout out to Chris. It's awesome, man, to see like the progress. And we talk
Oh
about
yeah.
this a lot inside the group, but we record all of the calls that we have so that you can go back and look at your own calls and look at the other calls of people in this group. But if you go back and look at the calls with Chris when he first came in, he was a different person. And that's, I think, one of the biggest things that we offer inside the Web Dev Incubator is it's not about syntax, it's not about frameworks, it's about the human element. Like Chris's mindset has changed. He as a person has changed. He's more motivated to learn. He's taking on more challenges in his life beyond outside of coding alone. And so it's really awesome to see the progress that Chris and all these guys have made. I mean, they all say it. Um, they look back to when they first joined, which for most of them was only a few months ago, and it's light years away from where they were. And I remember myself being in that spot of like sort of squandering and like just doing this cyclical learning process of like, okay, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, I feel like I'm getting nowhere. And that's really what we do inside the group is we show you the next step, the next place. We push you outside of your comfort zone. We have everybody this week developing their own components in a project that we're all building together, which I can't wait to share because that's going to be a really, really cool project when we build that.
It's gonna be awesome.
So we give you that experience that you can't get in a boot camp. And that experience is really what developers want to hire for, which is that community experience, understanding other developers. So, yeah, Chris said huge mindset change with the help of this group. Absolutely. I think everybody's in that spot. And so just want to thank you guys. And if you are interested in joining, we're here to have you inside the group. And with that, I will bid you all adieu. Enjoy your Saturday. If you are inside the Web Dev Incubator, we'll see you in about 20 minutes. Otherwise, see you guys next Saturday, and feel free to shout out if you want that free action call.
Later.
Guys, have a good
Peace.
week.